Wisconsin, $12,300. 2019 Dodge Chargers for Hertrick Fleet Services Incorporated, Milford, Delaware, $212,376.
Mayor, just out of curiosity, any idea when we went to Dodge Chargers, back to Dodges?
Well, they're all-wheel drive,
They
which
fix
was
their
part of
problems.
was going to be a question for me this evening, except that I read in there that they are all-wheel drive. So I thought we were headed more toward the Explorer than, but,
I mean, I have no problems with it, I just.
No, I don't
And
either.
I know they
That's-
also had problems at one time with the Chargers.
yeah, that was a while back when he first
Okay.
introduced them into the marketplace. So they've supposedly fixed all those things.
Good.
Is that right, Chief? Am I right about that?
Yes, we've looked into, the Dodge Chargers are actually cheaper than the Ford Explorers. And we've checked with several agencies that have been using Dodge Chargers for several years, and whatever those issues were before that we had don't seem to be an issue. It actually allowed us to get an extra vehicle that we wouldn't have gotten under the budget under the Explorers for the price. So
Yeah,
actually-
they had some problems early on, but I think they worked all those kinks out.
Yeah, and like I said, we did some research, we checked with Montgomery County, some other agencies. Our eval instructors just went down and got trained, and that's what they were using, and we've talked to several agencies, no one seems to be having any
And the
problems.
all-wheel drive capabilities.
And they're all-wheel
fantastic,
drive,
so,
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, we had to go with the V8, if you wanted the V6, it didn't have the all-wheel drive capability, we wanted to make sure we
Yeah.
stayed with the all-wheel drive for the safety purposes for the guys.
Sounds good.
Well, that's great, enjoy them.
Sure, thanks.
All right, the equipment installation for those cars from Occasion of a Lifetime LLC, Marshall, Maryland, $118,869.44. Four-year transform infrared spectrometer, Thermoelectron North America, Madison, Wisconsin, $27,593. Under Public Works, pay-by-phone consulting service, DEC Parking Associates, $16,800. I like this, Eric. I think you're gonna make a lot of people happy.
Yes.
I think you will, yeah, from what I hear from people all the time about, so, yeah. Utilities Department, wastewater repair of pump number 6, apparatus repair and engineering, Inc., Hagerstown, Maryland, $20,995. Any questions on that part yet? Under new business, approval of resolution, termination release with Somerset Fire Alarm and Security. Approval of reach memorandum of understanding, which we'll talk about tonight. Approval designating Alley 515 as Monarch Way, which we'll talk about tonight. Approval of user agreement for Cumberland Valley Model Yacht Club tonight. Approval of Hagerstown Cultural Trail additional public art is tonight. Approval of an easement with the Hagerstown Housing Authority for public art. I guess that's all part of the night. Approval of an agreement with Hagerstown Ice Amateur Athletic Association to use the inline rink at Fairgrounds Park. The approval of First Energy Solutions contract extension. The approval of revised application guidelines for Historic City Farmers Market. The approval of a noise ordinance exemption for Crumpy's Donut Drop. I guess music and fireworks are a problem. Approval of an acceptance of a vehicle donation from the Washington County Special Response Team. Any questions?
We are not discussing the reach
Oh,
memorandum of
okay,
understanding
okay.
tonight, so.
Do you want to have,
Yeah,
he'll come
if
up,
that's
please?
okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think we
Yeah.
should, yeah. They
Since
can have
Dana's
an
in the
understanding about what's
audience.
going on.
Yeah, Dana. Just an update would be nice.
Sure.
Thank you.
You'll have to excuse my voice. It's been missing for like a month. So if you can't understand me, let me know. Yeah, so we're actually really excited. We're getting ready to kick the program off. We've been working on all of the details for the Bridge to Change program actually over the last several months. Everything is pretty much set up. We have queued up right now about a handful of individuals ready to go, and it looks like they'll officially be out starting to clean next week. So the city has already kindly dropped off the supplies. Our supervisor has been in contact with Eric on how they're going to communicate and which areas that they're going to clean. They'll probably be out about twice a week right now. We started with the marketing on the project. We now have a Facebook page and website for it. And we have our first sponsor, which is AT&T, which is actually sponsoring the program. So there's a lot of excitement with our clients. There's a ton of excitement at Reach right now. And we've had, since we've been here, just to give you an update, we've had a blessed amount of people reach out to us in many different facets, wanting to know how they can support the program as we move on. So things from job service training to how to search for jobs online, how to apply to jobs online, if someone would need, a photographer offered to do headshots if someone would need it. Employers contacting us stating that if people go through the program and work with the case managers, they'd be interested in hiring individuals on full-time. So it's been kind of what we thought, what we'd seen from the other programs, where I believe this will be something that will help bring the community together, but at the same time benefiting our community as well.
Yeah, sounds exciting.
So we're ready to go.
Good.
Yes.
Good.
Any questions?
No, I'm excited.
Probably should
Thank
never
you.
ask that, right?
Thank you.
Sounds good.
Okay, so any other questions on the preliminary agenda? All right, next up, Zip Trip with DC and Fox 5, verbal update. Wes?
Good afternoon.
My one concern.
Give you guys, here's some information that you might
Thank you.
find helpful. So I asked Skip Davis to join me for this. I think most of you know Skip. He has been a real advocate for the city and for this Zip Trip opportunity in particular. As a matter of fact, last year when Fox 5 was in Frederick in August, Skip was there. Shortly thereafter, he came to my office and said, this would be something that would be great for Hagerstown. So before I get into all of that, just to explain what the Zip Trip is, first of all, it's sort of like the Today Show and the outdoor segments that they do, but on steroids. Because Fox 5 will be here in Hagerstown. This is the site they have chosen on August the 16th from 6 in the morning until 11 o'clock. So they'll be doing their entire morning show here, especially between 7 and 11. That will be the main time. There are 13 different segments, and then there are other opportunities with what they call weather hits with their meteorologist. So they came back in April, and Scott and at the time, Mike and Eric and I all met with them. We kind of scouted out locations, and the one that worked best was in front of the mural of unusual size on the cultural trail in the grassy area there, so that'll be the main staging area. As far as weather hit locations, it will be at City Park, different locations around City Park, and then also probably in the central lot with August Oberfest happening that weekend, an opportunity to promote that a little bit and to show off the progress that'll be happening there. But I wanted Skip to talk about this a little bit because I think he put a bug in their ear a little bit in terms of coming to Hagerstown and being such a big advocate of Hagerstown. And I think the great thing, Skip is a Hagerstown resident now, but was originally a Washington D.C. resident. So Fox 5 coming here, I feel like you have a hand in this. So tell Mayor and Council a little bit about why you thought this was so important to have this happen in Hagerstown.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. One of the reasons that I felt that this would be a great opportunity for Hagerstown is because when I went to Frederick to see it, they emphasized all the things that Frederick was doing, and there was a good PR for them. And I said, if they can go to Frederick, they can come to Hagerstown, which is 20 miles west of Frederick, and why not? So I came and talked to Wes, and he felt moved, and he didn't really know that much about it, and I filled him in on it, and I think it's a fantastic idea for Hagerstown to be shown throughout the region, what we have, what we offer, and so I felt that we should take advantage of that. And so everything that we're doing positively can be focused in this particular show. And I was surprised and
I think flabbergasted was the
yeah,
word you used.
yeah, and because I had forgotten about it, and I was busy with other things, with the Dome and Black Heritage Museums and so forth. And when Wes told me, I was speechless. I didn't know what to say, and but I think it's a fantastic opportunity for people in Maryland, the rest of Maryland, D.C., Virginia, West Virginia, and PA to know, if they don't know anything about Hagerstown, they'll know it at the end of this show. So I was really moved. Like I told Wes, I don't know what to say.
You're right, Skip. My wife has been telling me for at least 5 years, you need to get Channel 5 up here. And you're the one who did it. Good for you.
Good job.
Because what you're saying is absolutely true. We watch him every Friday.
Right.
And can't wait to see him up here.
Right, it's, you know, I was just moved by the things that they did in Frederick. And I was surprised that West really didn't know that much about it in the sense of doing it. And I think it's a fantastic opportunity for us.
It's been a learning experience for me, but I did talk to the public information officer from the city of Hagerstown, or I'm sorry, the city of Frederick earlier today, and she said that, you know, it was a fantastic experience. I was trying to get some feedback from her. Was there anything that happened that, you know, you wish you would have known ahead of time, you would have prepared better for, things like that? And she said, really, no. I mean, it was spectacular. We got all kinds of promotion out of something where, you know, we didn't have to spend a dime for it. And I hope that, you know, as we get closer to this, and I think I've gotten some help certainly from city staff, been fantastic. Amy Riley has been reaching out to some of you in particular about some of the segments, and I'll talk to some of you about some other things too, but certainly love to have your assistance with some things and your presence there on that day, which is August the 16th. So I think it should be fantastic. Let's just hope that the weather is good. That's the one thing we can't control. They told me, Fox 5 said only one time have they ever had to cancel, and that was when they were in Annapolis one time. So let's not make it number 2 here. Let's get some good weather. But I think this is, as Skip said, a great promotional opportunity for the city.
And one of the things that I just want to emphasize is if you have friends and that don't know about Fox 5, Zip Trip, or if they do know about it, they should tune in. Those that can't make it down here should tune in on Fox 5 on TV station, and so they can see it, as well as those that are able to make it. Please show up. I'll be taking pictures, don't worry.
Yeah. The more the merrier. Everybody is invited on the 16th.
I will be there.
Okay, great, fantastic.
Thank you,
Okay.
Scott.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wes. All right, farmers market guidelines review.
Good afternoon, everybody. So we are here just to do a quick review of the directives that you provided on May 8th and just sort of, just basically just point out where they show up in the revised guidelines, which are in your packet. One of the things that we did do is kind of revise the way it looks, so trying to make it a little more user-friendly for applicants, not to mention staff, just trying to remember what the guidelines are, so just sort of recategorizing some things, so it's a little bit easier to kind of follow. But of this, you gave 7 directives at the May 8th work session. One was for it to be a rent-free market, and so if you have your guidelines in front of you, that is guideline number 1. The second guideline you gave was for products to be exclusively homegrown or handmade artisan products, and that's reflected in guidelines number 2 and number 4 of the revised guidelines. The third directive was expanding the hours until 2 p.m. with a requirement for all the vendors to be present from 8 a.m. to 12 noon, and that's reflected in guidelines number 5 and number 6. We also, you also discussed having an annual 1 to 2 week closure following Christmas, following the Christmas holidays, in part to clean up the market, kick off the market year, and that's reflected in guideline number 5. We had a directive to update the attendance requirements, limiting vendors to 6 absences per year. That's reflected in guideline number 20. And then there was a directive to do an annual a good standing check of the vendors to make sure they're compliant with state, county, and city regulations, and that shows up in guideline number 43. And the 7th directive that you gave was actually was a non-directive in a sense. It was like to not put any limitations on vendors of any one type, and so that doesn't really show up. It's just not addressed in here at all. So that pretty much sums that up. One thing I did add towards the end of the guidelines is a business resources section, which has, I hope, much clearer information for potential vendors to read through on how to be compliant with state, city, county regulations with regards to sales tax, the county health department, registering their business, and any other resource they might want to do to make their business good and work and viable. So are there any questions?
Yep, looks good.
Great,
Thank you, Kim.
awesome. We hope so. We hope so. Yes, thank you. Yes, thanks.
Update on the stormwater utility implementation, Rodney.
Good afternoon. With me is David Bolova and Elizabeth Redway from Wood. Consultants have been working with us diligently on our stormwater management program and plan. We wanted tonight to give you an update on what we've been up to since the last time we talked to you about this, which was, I think, in November of last year. We've been continuing to work with our stormwater committee, and that's the citizen board that we have been put together, and we continue to work with them, and as we strive to get compliance with the stormwater permit that MDE has placed upon us. Yesterday, speaking of MDE, we went down to meet with them because they are the regulators of this permit. I think we had an excellent meeting with them. I think we really have a much better understanding of what they're looking for, and I think it gave us a much more workable plan that David will elaborate on a little bit. So I'm going to turn it over to David. He has a PowerPoint to run through. He's going to update you on some of the work we've done. We have some draft rates of a possible stormwater utility. And then we have a video we want to show you too that is some of the public education and work that we want to do in the upcoming months. And then we'll go from there. But yeah, I think go ahead, David.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Rodney, and thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be back here, Mayor and members of council, to provide basically an opportunity to, as we're halfway through phase 2 of the stormwater utility study, to provide you with some updates on what we've been working on and hopefully get some feedback from you in case there's anything that you see in there that you think we need to take into consideration. And so what I'm going to do is provide a very quick recap of phase 1 of the study, since it's almost 6 months ago, but spend most of my time drilling into very specific policy issues that we've been working through that at the end of the process in December, we'll have some findings and recommendations for you to be able to take some action. And then as Rodney said, back in November, we provided some preliminary rate ranges, and so what does this mean in terms of the potential cost to a typical homeowner or a business in the city of Hagerstown? And so we continue to crunch those numbers. They are all still preliminary. There's still a lot more work to do, but we wanted to get you a sense of where this is panning out in the long term, and then talk a little bit about the next steps. So just as a reminder, there were really 3 big drivers for why we're even undertaking a stormwater utility study in the first place. And so the biggest one in there is what Rodney went ahead and mentioned. And so that's your MS4 permit requirement to treat 20% of untreated impervious area in the city. And so by treated and untreated, something is considered treated if it flows to a stormwater structure that meets the requirements of the 2000 Maryland Department of Environmental Design Standards. And so that would be a big effort regardless. The thing that makes it an even greater effort is the fact that the permit says you have to have your processes in place and your actions in place by the year 2025. And so again, you've got to ramp up your capital program very quickly. And so at least at the time when we came to you back in November, our original estimate was that we would need to treat about 450 acres of impervious cover for a capital need of about $27 million. We're going to give you some updates on that because we've had an opportunity to refine the program, and I think we're moving in a good direction. But that's where we started from. By comparison, your fiscal year 19 capital budget was $1.1 million. And so as you can see, there's quite a delta between those two numbers, which is why the need to go ahead and look at potential funding sources. Another thing that is driving this, of course, is that As stormwater quality requirements have been put in place and your city ordinance requires new development and redevelopment to put these in, you now have a relatively large stormwater quality infrastructure in the city. Most of this is privately maintained, but the MS4 permit does require that the city go out and inspect these facilities. And if they are not operating as designed, then the city has a responsibility to work with those private property owners to be able to bring them into compliance. And so we are seeing about 10 new structures come in each year. And so we anticipate by the year or fiscal year 2021 that the existing resources to go out there and manage just the inspection component of that resources we have are going to be outstripped. And so we need additional funding for that. And then the last major component really comes down to the conveyance system. And so most people don't realize that the city of Hagerstown has such a large infrastructure, and that is because most of it is underground in terms of that 160 or 106 miles of pipe. The challenge is greater because a lot of that system is over 100 years old. Hagerstown, it was an urban center back at the turn of the century, and a lot of that infrastructure hasn't been touched ever since. And so your current maintenance program is actually reactionary, which is that typically something fails and then you react. And the conundrum with that, of course, is that you're now dealing with the chaos that causes, when you have a sinkhole in a parking lot or flooding that it creates. But it's also less cost effective to be able to, or having to go in there and maintaining by emergency. And so it's more cost effective to be able to get a sense of what it is that you need to do and then be proactive about that. And so that was kind of the third leg of this program, which is we need to get a better sense of what the system looks like, what are the challenges, what's that condition. And so the idea was to go through there and do closed circuit television of the system, and that way you would have a better sense of strategically where would you want to put your capital resources and able to be more proactive about maintaining your system. And this is just an example of terracotta pipe. This is in Hagerstown, and it shows you kind of what it looks like. And so this is something that if it failed, would probably go ahead and cause flooding issues or go ahead and cause property damage. And this is an example of some flooding in Hagerstown. I think this is back in 2015, Rodney, on West End, Teedham. But this is the kind of situation we're trying to avoid. And things like this could be caused by undersized pipes. They could be caused by collapsed pipes. They could be caused by clogging, but you don't know where those problem areas are until you actually go in and get an inventory of your system. In working with the Stormwater Advisory Committee and city staff, we also saw that there was a potential opportunity. And so right now in the city of Hagerstown, roadway, curb, and sidewalk maintenance is a private responsibility. And so when it comes time to have to replace or maintain curb and gutter or a sidewalk, it can impose a pretty significant burden on an individual property owner, as well as staff, because staff has to go out there and work with the property owner in order to be able to get that situation taken care of. I can say most localities, the storm drainage system or the curb and gutter is actually considered part of the public drainage system. And the city or the locality takes on those maintenance responsibilities and distributes those costs among the public at large. And so the feedback we had gotten from our Stormwater Advisory Committee was that this would be a good time to be able to bring the curb and gutter maintenance program under the city's program and consider it part of the storm drain system. And so that costs about $100,000 per year. The city actually gets some economies of scale from that because they're able to go ahead and manage larger contracts. In terms of the sidewalks, because sidewalks, they are not considered part of the storm drainage system, but that is something that could be covered under the general fund. And so remember, we're taking the entire stormwater program and we would fund it through that stormwater utility fee. And so you'd actually be relieving some cost burden on the general fund. And so that's one way that you could be able to cover the cost of that sidewalk maintenance without having to actually raise the general fund. Yes, sir.
However, the general fund isn't paying for that now.
Correct.
So how would we be saving money that we're not expending now?
Right, and so for the maintenance of the sidewalks themselves, you're correct. It's a cost that the city would be taking on, and the way that you would be able to cover that cost, and it is a new cost, would be through the general fund because it's having some of that freed up because,
We're paying out of the general fund now for stormwater management.
right.
Right. That'll all go over the stormwater
Right.
side. So with that
Right.
savings, you could spend, it's about another 100,000 a year on sidewalk repairs.
Right,
So
that we
another,
send out notices for.
so what's that mean for a property owner in Hagerstown? Instead of getting a notice from us that could be $4, $5, $6, $7,000 worth of curb and sidewalk work, you'll be paying a quarterly fee that'll be, as you'll see later, not that much. That's what we're proposing.
Okay. And so, as Rodney mentioned, you all had appointed a stormwater advisory committee that has had some very robust conversations over the last year, including the last 6 months as we've gone into phase 2. It's a very diverse group of stakeholders and interests, and we designed it that way to make sure that we were getting feedback from a lot of different stakeholder groups. And so at the end of phase 1, the question really came down to not whether there would be cost impacts. Even just the MS4 was going to result in a very appreciable increase in capital costs for the city. And so the question really came down to how those costs would be distributed among those who live here or work here in the city of Hagerstown. And so there were a couple of key findings that the advisory committee presented to you all in November. And so boiling them down, the first one was make sure that we're planning for revenue sources, or a revenue source that's sufficient to meet long-term programmatic needs. And so I think the point there was it doesn't make any sense to go through this effort and not do a full accounting of what you need to sustain your stormwater program for the foreseeable future. The other big areas that they focused on were the equity and fairness. And so those were very important with respect to their conversations. And part and parcel of that is the idea that if you are a property that has impervious cover and you are contributing to the need for stormwater services, then regardless of your tax status, that you need to be part of the solution for our stormwater management program. And so what the advisory committee felt was the most equitable approach was a user fee that was based on the amount of impervious cover that you had on your property. And so in this case, the recommendation was that you'd have a billing unit of 1,000 square feet, and then individual properties would be charged based on those billing units. The other thing with respect to the funding policy was the concept that the city should pay for its own properties. And so number one, it sends a signal that the city has skin in the game. But number two, from a legal standpoint, it allows the city to be able to charge other governmental properties, whether that's local, state, or federal. And particularly with the federal government, if you don't charge yourself, they can basically say that charging the federal government is arbitrary. And so if you charge yourself, you're able to charge other local government entities. And so this is just an example of the recommended approach that came out of there. It's pretty simple. So in this, you've got a property with 3,345 square feet of impervious surface. If you've got a billing unit of 1,000, that comes out to roughly 3 billing units if you use natural rounding. And so for that property, you'd multiply 3 by the rate set by city council, and that's the fee that they'd have to pay. The other part is with respect to a credit policy. And so in Maryland, if you adopt a stormwater utility fee, such as the one that you are considering right now, you have to have a system of credits that provides some kind of credit for somebody who owns and operates a stormwater management structure. That's where the requirement ends. And so they say you have to have something like that, but it's up to you, up to the city, to determine how you'd structure that. And so the finding from the advisory committee was, hey, yeah, we want to make sure that we're complying with law. We want to make sure that if you're a property owner that's managing one of these things, that you get a credit. But we also want to provide additional incentives in order to meet city-specific policies and goals. And so one of them is that they wanted to be able to incentivize the idea of redevelopment, getting people to come downtown and redeveloping property, and also to incentivize voluntary private investments in stormwater infrastructure. Because if you're doing that, it's a direct cost avoidance by the city. And so they thought those two things were very important. So with respect to phase 2, so phase 1, we had public involvement with the advisory committee. We looked at that program, we evaluated the different funding options and came up with some recommendations to the city council, and you authorized us to move forward with phase 2. And so phase two consists of a couple different parts. So one of them is continuing that public involvement with the advisory committee, but actually we're going to be expanding that public involvement and getting their feedback. Our first set of meetings is going to be on August 8th, and so I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. But we also are looking to finalize the stormwater program costs and then finalize some of the policies that go into developing a rate structure. And so at the end of the day, the idea is that we would run rate scenarios and present back some final recommendations to City Council, I believe in December, in terms of what those rate structures might be and if you have a preference for going one way or the other. If you authorize moving forward at that point, we would go into ordinance development, and so this is all implemented through an ordinance that you all would adopt, and then you'd have actual implementation of the utility. So I want to focus on a couple of key policy discussion and decision areas that I thought that you all would be particularly interested in. So the first one is the impervious area refinement. And so key to any kind of user fee based on impervious cover is that you have to have a reliable base map with the impervious areas. And so City of Hagerstown has a pretty robust geographic information system that includes impervious cover. And so now we are working to be able to refine that and make it as robust as possible. And so this is a team effort where the city is going through and they are working to refine that impervious area. And then Wood, our staff, is helping with that QA/QC based on our experience with other localities. But the idea is to be able to go ahead and make that as accurate as possible, realizing that it's never going to be 100%. You're going to be able to get every single little piece of impervious cover. And so at the end of the day, the ordinance will include some kind of process where you're able to verify the impervious cover in your process, and there's an appeals process if it's absolutely necessary. So there's a release valve for something like that. But this is one of those behind-the-scenes kind of things that it's very, very important to go through and try to make that map as accurate as possible. Billing mechanism. And so ultimately, the fee has to be delivered through some kind of billing mechanisms, and you have a couple of different options that are out there. And so the typical options and the ones that we looked at were the real property tax bill, the water sewer utility bill, and then a standalone bill. I don't think Elizabeth and I would ever recommend a standalone bill because it's very hard to enforce if somebody's getting a standalone bill just for stormwater. City of Richmond, Virginia did that. It didn't work out so well. And so it really came down to the real property tax and the water and sewer bill. And so the one pro to a real property tax bill is it's parcel based. And a utility fee for stormwater at least is also going to be parcel based. It's the impervious area on your parcel. The thing going for a water and sewer utility bill is that it treats the stormwater as a utility, which is what it's meant to be. And so this is a fee for service. And so it sends the signal from the city by the billing mechanism that yes, you are paying for a fee for service just like you would be for wastewater, just like you would be for drinking water. And so at the end of the day, the recommendation was that we use the water and sewer or the water and sewer bill as the billing mechanism. And so that's the way we're proceeding towards doing that. And so we've worked with multiple localities to make that work. And so we're doing that process now. And so the budget that has been put together does include funding for the staff that's necessary to make sure that we're integrating this properly with the other billing mechanisms, as well as some one-time setup fees that are required for the billing masks and Munis and other programs. So program refinement. So this is the most impactful one, quite frankly. And there's a couple different moving parts on here that we wanted to just go ahead and mention. And so the first one is that impervious area treatment. And so I had mentioned earlier on that we had originally assumed 450 acres that we would need to treat for stormwater quality. And so we've been working back and forth with MDE and other stakeholders to figure out how does that need to change? How can we go ahead and refine that? And so one of the ones was that there are particular parcels in Hagerstown that can actually be taken out of the equation. And these are typically parcels that are subject to other permit requirements. And so, for instance, if you are subject to a Maryland industrial stormwater permit, and there's about, 18 of these properties in the city of Hagerstown?
Hagerstown Block, Thomas Benton Hunter Concrete Plant.
Exactly.
Many others.
So they operate under a separate permit, and they have different requirements, and so the city does not have to include them in the amount of area that you have to treat. And so we were able to take that out of that 450 acres. We also are taking credit for your street sweeping operations, which are very robust. We originally were a little nervous about doing that, but in our conversations with MDE yesterday, I think we came away with a better sense that we could rely on street sweeping as a credit, and so we wanted to take that out. But the bottom line is that we're able to reduce that treatment area from 450 acres to about 366 acres. And then when you go ahead and figure out what that means in terms of capital costs, we've figured that you've gone from 27 million down to about 23.6 million. And so you're heading in the right direction. Bonding assumptions have also changed. And so our original rate assumed that it would be 100% bond financed. We are currently evaluating reducing that down to $1 million per year. And so this comes after some very good discussions, in-depth discussions with your finance staff. And so I think we feel much more comfortable with that kind of approach. What that does, though, is it requires you to build more cash at the beginning in order to be able to pay for those projects. And so that has an upward pressure on your rates. And then finally, to Rodney's point, we also had a chance to go ahead and meet with MDE yesterday about credit trading with city wastewater. And so this, quite frankly, was a game changer because one of the issues that we were facing is how do you go ahead and meet these requirements within that short 5-year period. And so what Maryland has done is that they've created a credit trading program. And so a wastewater treatment facility, if they are exceeding their permit requirements, can have credits certified, and then they can go ahead and transfer those over to an industrial permit holder, a stormwater permit holder, any other kind of person who needs to buy those credits. And in this case, Hagerstown, your treatment does exceed permit discharge limits, and so these can be sold as credits. MDE brokers this, but how much those credits cost or whether you simply want to give them away, that's a negotiated process between the individual parties. It's really important to note that these are year-to-year credits. And so this isn't something one and done where you can buy a credit and you're off the hook. These are credits that have to be certified each year, and they have to be purchased each year.
Can they be sold to ourselves? Can they be used to reduce our expense?
Exactly, yes. And so those are kind of the key takeaways, which is that while the credits have to be placed on a registry, they have to be certified, they could be transferred from wastewater to stormwater without offering them on the open market. And in fact, they don't get involved in setting the price. And so if the city of Hagerstown determined that it was in the city's best interest to, at no charge, transfer credits from wastewater to stormwater, that's at your discretion. And in fact, MDE wasn't able to tell us what the market rate for credits is at this point because everybody who's done it so far has done it internally. And so, for instance, Anne Arundel County, they have developed a system where their wastewater credits are going to meet their stormwater requirements. The one big caveat to all this is MDE's expectation is that this is not something that you can do in perpetuity. This is something that you do to manage change. And so it's not a long-term replacement for putting in that stormwater infrastructure, but it is a way to go ahead and extend the time period for you to be able to go ahead and install that infrastructure to something more meaningful or reasonable. And in this case, and we'll go through it, we're thinking that a 10-year time horizon is something that's doable and will meet Maryland Department of Environmental's expectation that you're doing the maximum extent practicable. And so this gives you an idea of that kind of sample use of credits. And so you can see on the bottom in the purple, in terms of acres treated by stormwater structures, we've stretched that out to fiscal year 30. And so right there in fiscal year 25, which is your compliance deadline for your permit, that's when you go ahead and make up that gap by transferring those credits over. And each year, you would put more infrastructure in the ground, and you would rely a little bit less on credits and a little bit less on credits until the very end, you will have met your permit through the use of stormwater infrastructure. But that's the basic mechanism of how MDE would envision that you would be able to meet your program requirements, give you more time, but ultimately be able to get that stormwater infrastructure put into place. Any questions on that before I move to the next one? So the next big policy question is on those credits. And so as I mentioned, state code requires that those credits be put into place. And so the question for the advisory committee was, how much do you give for those credits? And so at a minimum, in order to be able to get those credits, you got to have put in a structure that actually meets the city stormwater management ordinance. And so you have to have some technical standards and requirements. And it also has to be in compliance with its maintenance agreement. So if it's not being properly maintained, you shouldn't be able to get credits for that. So the next question then came down, all right, so with that, what is the amount that you want to be able to provide? And that's really linked to the benefit to the city. And so what the advisory committee landed on was, hey, we want to be able to provide credits, higher credits for higher levels of treatment. And you also want to be able to provide extra credit for meeting policy goals that are important to the city of Hagerstown. So again, the redevelopment and also cost avoidance if you're doing this on a voluntary basis. And so this is the draft credit policy in a nutshell. And so you can see up there on the top, if it's a condition of development, so if you had to do it regardless, it's going to go in irrespective of whether there's a stormwater utility fee or any other permit requirements. And it controls new impervious cover. So you're creating new impervious cover. That's the least benefit to the city. It doesn't help to reduce your treatment requirements. But again, it's something that property owner is doing that their neighbor isn't. And so in this case, based on the design, you'd be able to get between 15 and 25% credit. If it's condition of development, you're controlling existing impervious cover. So if it's redevelopment, well, you actually are benefiting the city because that redevelopment, you get to take that out of, or it gets applied to that 20% treatment requirement. So again, you have to do it, but you have a tangible impact to the city's program. And so we envision a 40% credit for that. And then for the voluntary, so you are just doing it because you think it's the right thing to do, or you think that credit might help you go ahead and do something in the long term, that's where we'd say that you could maximize your credits at that 60%. And so we'll continue to work through that. Again, these are not giveaways. Credits have to be linked with some kind of benefit to the users as a whole. But that's the structure that we were really looking at. And then we also have an incentive program. And so one of the questions that the advisory committee asked, and one of the ones that you asked, was how can we incentivize residents to be part of that solution? How can we get them to be vested in the program? And so there's really two ways that the advisory committee is recommending at this point, which is you got your larger scale incentives. And so these are things where the city would work to attract larger scale investments, where you would put in a structure, and that structure would help meet that 20% treatment requirement. And so these are ones where the city might provide a match of up to 50%, because anything that private person puts in is a cost avoidance to the city. And then we have smaller ones. And so these, again, are incremental improvements throughout the city that residences and small businesses can do that help water quality in the long term and also help educate residents. And so this is the one where the advisory committee really thought we had an opportunity to tailor it to the specific needs and desires of Hagerstown. And we also saw it as a very good potential partnership with the Washington County Soil Conservation District. Because when you think about it, it's very similar to what they already do with agricultural properties, with their best management practices, and they're very well equipped to have people go out there and provide technical assistance to residents. A good example is the city of Charlottesville in Virginia. And so in this case, they have something called a conservation assistance program. They have a certain amount of money that's provided by the city of Charlottesville. There's a particular range of projects that are available, and if a property owner is interested in doing something like that on their property, then a soil conservation district member will come out there, they'll assess the site, they'll work with the property owner, they'll come up with a plan, and then once it's implemented or approved and implemented, then they'll get a certain amount of cost share out of the program. And so these are just a couple of examples. When we were talking with the advisory committee, one of the things that came up very frequently was that you have excess impervious cover that just simply doesn't get used. So whether that's a parking lot, whether that's a derelict shed or other structure, that it would actually be a real benefit for it to come down or out. That's something that is often covered by one of these incentive programs, is to help the cost share to take that out and replace it with grass or some other pervious surface. Another example is pervious pavers, and so when people go in and replace their driveways, that you can provide an incentive for them to put something in that actually allows some of that stormwater to soak into the ground. And then last but not least is public outreach. And so this is, again, a hallmark of any program that we're trying to put together. Is it's extraordinarily important that your residents and businesses, they understand why the city is engaging in this, and they have faith and confidence about what it is that we're doing. And so in addition to the advisory committee, we have public meetings established for August 8th at Elgin Station. And so we're going to have one that's going to be business focused during the day, and then one that's residents focused during the evening. And so the idea is that you would have a time, maybe a half hour, where people could come in, they'll be able to talk to staff, they'll be able to talk to the consultants, just ask questions casually. There will be a presentation, and then they'll have a chance to be able to ask questions after that as well. And then we'll continue to do additional outreach to civic organizations, and then particularly for large ratepayers, because those are the folks that are going to probably have the biggest questions. And so, we'll identify those larger ratepayers and approach them in August and September just to see what kind of questions and concerns they might have. But another big part of our public education and outreach is video that, Rodney, you want to go ahead and introduce this? Because you're the star of the show, I believe.
Yes, I'll call Eric out of the control room to set up the video for us, but we wanted to put a piece together that would be helpful to people to understand what this is all about, why this is happening. It's not just something that the city decided to do. So we put together this video. It's about 8 minutes long, and if it doesn't win the award for Best Short Film as a stormwater video that Wes and Eric put together, I'll be shocked, because I'm going, yes, it'll be sold out, I guarantee you. So it's about 8 minutes long, but I think it's helpful to, it kind of summarizes in pictures what David just explained.
The city stormwater program is regulated under a permit from the Maryland Department of the Environment. And we've had this stormwater permit since 2002, but just in the last year, in 2018, they issued a new permit and updated some requirements in the permit.
A big part of our responsibility with the new permit that we received from MDE and EPA is that we have to treat 20% of the impervious area within the city. Impervious areas are rooftops, sidewalks, blacktop, driveways, all those things that the water doesn't percolate through but simply runs off.
In the city the size of Hagerstown, we've calculated that that means providing treatment for maybe as much as 400 or 450 acres of impervious surface. The city is looking at maybe as much as $25 or $30 million that we need to generate and try to have these projects online by 2025.
Folks that think if they live in West Virginia or Pennsylvania or on the Eastern Shore or way out in Western Maryland are going to sort of get away from this, that's not going to happen. So the city, like all of these other local jurisdictions, has to implement some fixes to some of these stormwater flow issues that are impacting the bay, just like any other jurisdiction does, because like every other jurisdiction, we have built up the environment around us in a very urban way over a long period of time without taking into account the long-term impacts that the quantity of flow generated from storm systems and the quality of that flow going into the bay has on that ecosystem.
And things that we're concerned about there are nutrients such as nitrogen and phosphorus, which pollute the waters and cause unhealthy areas and dead zones in the water. Also trash and sediment, which is soil being conveyed downstream. So on the flooding issue, what we're trying to do there is look at areas in the city where there's flooding of private property and issues that we just don't have the resources right now to address. On the water quality issue, what we're trying to do there is actually clean the water before it leaves the storm drain system and enters the waters of the state. So that might involve removing pavement, it might involve rain gardens, it might involve other methods that are called best practices to remove nutrients from the water. So when we received our permit requirements, the first thing that we decided to do was form a stormwater advisory committee. The committee is made up of citizens of our community, and they represent various parts of the community. We wanted a diverse set of voices to help us solve this problem in the most efficient way possible.
Our solutions may be very different, our sense of what stakeholders we may represent. There are, of course, differences there, but we have to kind of agree on the challenges so that we can be equitable and supportive of people in other groups, of other groups of stakeholders. So the conversation has been around how do we reward what's going well? How do we encourage different groups of interested parties to collaborate with each other, as we have been able to do at this table, and to sort of try and make a positive out of what is that's a challenge.
There are really two basic ways of raising revenue like this. One would be a tax increase that would affect all property owners that receive tax bills now. The other way is implementing what we're calling a stormwater user fee, and it's actually a fee that is based upon how much impervious surface you have on your property, because the more impervious surface you have, the more runoff you're generating, and really the more you're straining our stormwater system.
I'm sure that if you look at Frederick City, who's had this fee for a long time, and in some of the other jurisdictions that are adopting it, the city's going to have to implement some type of stormwater management fee that allows us to be able to pay for the projects that the state and federal governments are mandating that we have to do to correct those stream resource stormwater management impacts that we're having.
I would certainly contribute towards it. I lost a brand new truck. I had a brand new Isuzu box truck that I paid almost $80,000 for that got under 6 feet of water and was totaled. I lost another pickup truck, and we lost probably $50,000 to $100,000 of inventory from the building being flooded. So we lost a significant amount of money, and certainly would be happy to contribute a little each month or each year to help solve the problem.
During our time on the committee, we spent multiple meetings discussing a credit policy to help soften the blow of the cost for everybody affected. We discussed new construction, redevelopment, and also voluntary practices for the homeowners themselves.
As a church, we don't pay taxes. We're blessed by that. And we don't necessarily face that dilemma, which I know is a challenge for some people. We do pay our electric bills and our gas bills and all those sort of things. But as a church that has a lot of hard surfaces around it, as a large parking lot, we need to be aware how that impacts the system. Is it something we want to do and paying fees for that? Probably not, but it's something we need to do, something we're called to do, something that is important for us to do. So we will engage in the process. We will pay our part of keeping the environment that we care and love about as safe and as pristine for ourselves as well as for those who come after us.
It's important that the water quality of what's heading to the Chesapeake improves. The water that comes through here is just filthy. It's full of trash and debris, and every bit of improved stormwater management that we can do improves the quality of our drinking water and improves the quality of the Chesapeake Bay.
So we have a lot of work to do in front of us, and some of it's very expensive. But the first thing we want to do is figure out ways to kind of address the low-hanging fruit. And some of the things that we can do to improve water quality would be accelerate our street sweeping program to pick up more trash and solids off the street. Would be to actually physically clean out the inlets by lifting off the grate and sucking out whatever debris and trash is in there. And also be planting trees. I think you'll see a significant increase in the amount of trees that we plant every place basically we can find, because that gives us credits towards meeting that 20% pavement reduction goal. So we're standing here at a place that most people have probably never been to. It's in City Park, it's the north end, and behind me a large storm drain drains most of the west end. There's drains like this all throughout the city. This is just part of the network of drainage that conveys water from wherever it falls on the ground, eventually hitting the Chesapeake Bay. The thing about the system is that most of it's underground, so most of us don't even think about it. All most of us care about is that when it rains, that the water gets taken away. And where is away? It's just like when you have a piece of trash and you throw it away. Away is an actual place. And in this case, when something is thrown on the ground, on the street, and it's washed away, away is like the stream that we're standing here today. It's the Antietam Creek. It's the Potomac River. It's not good enough anymore for us just to say, as long as it goes away, it's fine, because it is affecting all of us. It has an impact, and when we all do that, it has a cumulative impact that's very significant. So I want to thank Wes and Eric for putting that together for us. I think hopefully it's helpful.
Good job.
Yeah, very informative.
I take it the Tiny One Park project will be part of this?
Yeah.
Good job, Kristen. Oh, yes, for sure.
Going back to the PowerPoint.
Yes, we're almost finished. Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, thank you. So we're going to be showing off Hagerstown now to all of our other clients. That was really good. So I wanted to wrap up with an updated preliminary rate range, because when we came back to you back in November, we provided a heavily caveated estimate of what that stormwater utility fee might look like in terms of the amount per billing unit and also the amount per median property owner here in the city. And so with a lot of different caveats, we wanted to come back with you just to be able to go ahead and check in so that you had a good sense of where things were going. And so the usual disclosures, which are we are still in the process of refining that program, and just in the last couple of weeks we've made some pretty big breakthroughs, and so you never know what's going to happen between now and next November. Right now we're assuming a certain amount of bonding. The bonding has a pretty big impact with respect to how long you can take out those costs, and so if that changes, the rates will also change. We're assuming that those credits that we're getting for street sweepers, that those stay in place. And again, as I mentioned, with MDE, it sounds to me like we can rely on those for a while. It also assumes no major changes to the wastewater permit. And so again, right now you get to discharge at a certain amount, and based on that, you can generate a certain amount of credits because you're exceeding your permit requirements. But if their permit was to change, that might affect their ability to generate credits. And then we're also assuming a 10-year capital program with the idea that those credits would be transferred from wastewater to stormwater at no cost. And so again, that's a decision that City Council would have to make in terms of how you're going to manage those two utility systems. But based on those kind of assumptions, right now we're looking at a cost range for fiscal year 2020 of about $30 per square foot billing unit. And so in the city of Hagerstown, per 1,000 square feet, yes. And so, for a median single-family residential fee, and so your median residential property here is going to be 2 billing units based on our analysis, and so they'd be paying about $60 per year, plus or minus. By the time you bring that out to 2025, and the program is ramping up, that cost would come out to about $40 per billing unit, plus or minus, again, for a median cost per household of about $80 per year. That's relatively close to what we had provided last November, and so that's good news. And again, it continues to shift, and we'll go ahead and keep you in on the loop on that. But we thought that was very important for you to be able to get a sense that things weren't straying dramatically from what we showed you last November. There's also been quite a bit of activity closer to home as other localities have started to tackle the costs of their stormwater capital programs. So as mentioned, the city of Frederick has had one in for a while now. Theirs for a typical quarter-acre lot. They didn't define what typical is, but that's about $54 per year. So again, kind of in the ballpark of what we're looking at. Chambersburg does it a little odd. They do $4 per sanitary sewer connection per month, and so that comes out to $48. They're actually working towards moving towards an impervious area-based billing system now as well, and so they're making that transition. Greencastle, Pennsylvania, so they've just gone through a process. Their average, and so this isn't median, they went ahead and reported the average was $172 per year. I didn't have enough information to figure out what the median was. But this gives you an idea of kind of that range, and so it doesn't put you at a stead with what a lot of other localities are experiencing within the region. And then I won't go through this next slide, but again, it's in your packet, and it just shows that, you know, again, it's not just something that's happening in the Hagerstown region, that all of Maryland is dealing with having to ramp up their programs to pay for the new expectations with regard to stormwater program costs. So next steps and feedback. So we're looking forward to receiving that feedback at those public meetings. That's going to be really important for us to be able to hear, and we're going to be taking that message back to the Stormwater Advisory Committee so that they can understand kind of what the feedback is from the public based on those presentations. We're going to continue to refine the impervious mapping, and we're also going to continue to finalize that program and bring those final cash flow needs to the Stormwater Advisory Committee. And so based on that, what we can do, once we have a really good sense of that cash flow need, then we can start running different rate scenarios. And ultimately, the idea is that the advisory committee and city staff would sit down and say, hey, these are the rate scenarios that we think make the most sense, that they would be able to provide back to you in December for your consideration. So generally, those are kind of the next steps that we would go through over the next couple of months. But with that, pleased to answer any questions and appreciate your attention.
Thank you. Would we be advised right now, going forward as we go forth with our sidewalk maintenance plans and other things, to transition to a pervious type of paving system instead of pouring cement and pouring more asphalt to different places?
I think that's always a possibility. I know State Highway is starting to kick that around a little bit. The impervious concrete products that are out there, there's pros and cons of them. Certainly the pro is this. There's some cons too about how much they have to be maintained and how they have to be maintained, like literally vacuuming them and getting the materials out of. So we want to work through all those issues, but I definitely see that happening more and more in the next 5 years or so. But I don't think we're ready to wholesale start making all our sidewalks impervious.
Yeah.
I think it's a tool in the tool bag.
Hagerstown Ford, when they expanded and did some different things out there, put in a pervious parking lot that allows the water. You can watch it. You don't see the runoff like we used to see. It dissipates into the parking lot, which I think would be godsend on some of these big parking lots.
Exactly.
Like some of the development we have in the pipeline now.
Right.
So I guess the real question is, how long does that type of paving service last opposed to asphalt and traditional means? Or what's the maintenance going to be?
Yeah, I mean, it's got, and each is going to be different. I mean, ours has lasted now, I guess it's 5 years since it's been done, and it's, it's like almost in the same condition now that it was 3 years ago.
Snow removal? Any issues with snow removal?
No. Well, keep in mind, we don't do a lot of snow removal. Because that means you gotta move all those cars, and you gotta do,
Right, okay.
we do a swipe, and
Yeah, I just
everybody has to
wondered
fend
what
for themselves when they go in, so.
But the other thing that businesses could start doing and homeowners could start doing now is looking at the rain garden concept and, you know, what happens to the runoff from your gutters and, you know, that's something, and maybe in those public meetings that people could get ahead of the curve a little bit.
And that's something, rain gardens are a very common component of that incentive program. And again, you can have a rain garden at relatively low expense that's put in, that's gonna be good for the environment. You might not necessarily get credit for it if it's not built to a design capacity. Or, you know, if you had a business that really wanted to make an investment, they could get some credit for that if they're willing to go ahead and maintain that. But, yeah.
That would shave some money off their fee then.
Right.
Well, I have to admit, you know, I go back to like 2007 when we had a conversation about how do we devise a way to take care of sidewalks that citizens don't have to get those notices and all that. And I think being able to have a savings in the general fund that could actually, you know, I'll pay $7 a month to never have to worry about replacing my sidewalk, incurring the cost of replacing my sidewalk.
Yeah, some of these folks are getting big bills.
Yeah,
Or
I know.
they're
Oh,
faced
without a
with
doubt.
Paying big bills.
I mean, you're gonna have the ones who have replaced their sidewalk and are gonna go, that's not fair to me, I've already spent my $4,500 or $5,000, and I feel for them. But, you know, going forward for the next 100 years, if we can,
Yeah.
you know, devise a way to
Yeah,
take
we
care of
issue
sidewalks.
75 to 125 notices every year for sidewalks and curbs, so.
Trust me, I know.
Yes, yes, I know you know.
Get those phone calls, yeah.
What's the nexus between using this program, or the indirect savings from it, for sidewalks and managing stormwater management?
Well, I think let me start with saying with the curb system, the nexus is that it is part of the stormwater system.
I get curbs and gutters. I'm
So
talking about
curbs are going to be
sidewalks.
folded, we're proposing that curbs would be folded into the system, the maintenance of those. There's lots of places where the curb and the sidewalk are right beside each other, so if you're going to fix the curb, you know, you deal with the sidewalk, that's one issue. But it just seems like if we're going to move in the direction of taking care of the curbs, why don't we take care of the sidewalks too? And how we would propose to do that would be the savings in the general fund, that we would take from the general fund and pay things out of the stormwater fund.
We budget $1 million a year now, ready for stormwater management, is that what?
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. So that money would all go into stormwater, so it'd be $1 million a year savings to the general fund.
And
you can
you
say
said
that.
notices equated to about 100,000 for sidewalks?
100,000 roughly for curb and 100,000 for sidewalk.
Yeah, I mean, touche.
That's what they
I mean,
typically
that's
do.
a big savings.
Hopefully, though, if we take on the sidewalk maintenance, there is some sort of a permeable substance that we could use instead of cement as we maintain those sidewalks to gain further credits.
I think the sidewalk system would be greatly improved by having one entity under the control to, you know, instead of this patchwork where you're fixing yours and you're fixing yours.
And we're
That we
calling
would go through
different
and do
contractors,
it.
and we're
I
using
think it would make
different
a.
mixes.
Economies of scale is a savings.
Yes, economies of
by
scale.
itself.
I think there's lots of reasons to look at a different way of doing business there.
Will the credit program that is proposed to be applied within the sewer allocation system, has MDE given any indication that that will have an impact on the availability within your capacity management plan? In other words, MDE often, you know, has the you know, these mandates, you know, where, you know, it's not that clear. And so I'm hearing, you know, 2025 rolls around, and we have an 8 million, let's just use it, we have 8 million gallon plant, and we're using 6 million gallons a day, right? And so we think there's 2 million there, but we got to do a capacity management plan, which says out of all the MRGA, because we just had this discussion, a few weeks ago on a property that was outside of the MRGA, and how do we give them service, how do we give them sewer service or whatever. So my question is, once we get done the capacity management plan, are we able to count that capacity twice? Can we count it both within, as it's obligated on a piece of paper and a comp plan that says we're gonna provide service to this area, and that area that's not currently being served, that we're counting on a piece of paper, that empty amount can also be credited toward the stormwater management offset for that period of time?
No. The simple answer is no, you can't double count it. Within our MPDS permit, our current permit and our permit that is being negotiated, we have concentration-based limits, but we also have load-based limits. So for a trading program, any excess load, if you will, any load that we do not, the better we do, the more capacity as far as
Right.
additional nitrogen and phosphorus that we would have available. Within the trading program, and I actually had a conference call today with MDE, so we discussed it a little more. Within the trading program, what we would be required to do through our MPDS permit is every month, we would be required to register that unused load, if you will. Then MDE reviews our MOR, DMR, and then certifies that load. However, we could not necessarily, it wouldn't be in the best interest of the wastewater treatment plant to release that to the stormwater program until we knew in December.
You wouldn't want to skim that off the top right out of the gate for an entire year.
No.
I understand.
No, we would want to make sure we manage that throughout the calendar year because we wouldn't want to find the wastewater treatment plant in non-compliance of their permit. They exceeded a
Based on
load.
paper. I don't want the public to hear that we're in non-compliance because of actual
Right.
load based on paper.
Yeah, if we, let's just say, we transferred 1,000 pounds of total nitrogen to the stormwater program, and we did that in the middle of the year.
Which
and-
equates to so many acres of
Right.
impervious
Right.
area treated.
So,
And
Go
so
ahead.
then, let's just say we had a couple wet months, and so our load being discharged from the wastewater treatment plant increased. We have to make sure,
Right.
when we get to the end of the calendar year, that we stay within our permit loads.
But then what you could give or sell to the stormwater program would be from this year that's behind
Right.
us.
on
It's,
a very temporary basis.
yeah, year by
I
year.
understand, I'm just
Yeah.
trying to make sure that 25 hits, 26 hits, 27 hits, we continue to see development. We now have a new capacity management plan, and want to make sure that MD isn't, going to say, oh, well, you've already. and
We can't,
It sounds
yeah.
like that's.
We
what will
cannot
happen.
double count it. The
Right.
load is the load, regardless of whether it goes into the stormwater
Which-
program or the wastewater program.
Which I gotta tell you seems very odd, and I use this example, and this is what I was trying to get to, in this last point. Every jurisdiction has to do this, and I'm just gonna use the example of the jurisdiction I work for, Myersville, because what we've said is, hey, we've got an amount, it's about $550,000 to meet about 15 acres. We obviously have a much smaller max, or a much smaller town, and we said, okay, we've got a number of homes that are on septic right outside of the town. And we worked through a process of deliberation with those homes, no different than the 40,000 homes that are outside of the city on private systems. And we said, hey, 30 homes or whatever, we'll agree to annex you into the town. We'll take you off of septic. We will connect you to the public sewer system that we own if you just simply agree to annex. Now you're gonna get sewer, now we get a new tax base, and for that $550,000 we're gonna spend, those 30 homes generating $1,500 a year in new taxes, we actually make back that $550,000 over like a 20-year life cycle. But we keep those customers permanently, and more importantly, you get about 0.4 acres of credit for every septic you take off and put on the public system, which in our case, the reason I asked that question is because what do we have capacity-wise? Because what it sounds like is MDE is not gonna let you double count it on paper, but if you actually make those physical connections, you actually get a greater credit, but you actually increase that amount that you're connecting to it, thereby decreasing the actual available paper allocation that you have. And so, for me, it's a bit of a catch-22, but at the end of the day, that methodology actually pays the system back to make those improvements. Just a
It's
Any other questions
complex program.
at this point?
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, David.
All right, we're gonna switch up. We're gonna go to the building and trade codes update, and then we'll do the cultural trail. Sorry to put you through it, Rodney.
We'll let Eric get set up here real quick with the next PowerPoint. All right, so good evening. We're here tonight to talk about the Building Codes and Trades update. It's something that we've talked about for a little while here, as far as that we had the Permits Inspection Code Compliance Review Committee that had some input on this, and as well we worked with a trade licensee work group as well to develop our local amendments for the stuff. To give you some little background on it is that the Maryland adopts the local building, or adopts a building code and other associated codes that require local jurisdictions to adopt the codes as well, and then can be with local amendments. So we can choose things that work for our local jurisdiction. The governor adopted this building code in March of this year, and we have essentially 1 year to adopt the code to put it into effect. So basically, I'm just going to kind of go through the memo here, but using through some slides to kind of go over what we were talking about. So again, some of the contributors that we had was the Permits Inspection Code Compliance Review Committee. That was appointed by the mayor and council. We included a list with a memo of the members of that group. Then also we had the City Licensed Contractors Work Group. Essentially just to remind you that we invited anyone that is licensed with the City of Hagerstown or any HVAC contractor that's licensed with the state to pull a permit with our office. In the last 3 years, we invited them to be part of this work group. Anyone that submitted back an interest letter was invited to attend any of our meetings so that we could discuss these local amendments. And then also the Washington County Division of Construction goes through the exact same process that we went through, where they get with local contractors and architects to go over the changes to the code. Blaine attended all of those meetings at Washington County to make sure that the county, what they're proposing for any changes is similar to what the city would do as well, so we wouldn't be contradicting where you would go across the city line and have a different set of requirements, so we'd be on the same page. All right, so one of the key changes that we wanted to point out there in the building code was to let you know that the Manual J designs, which I know everyone here knows what a Manual J design is, and I know Councilmember McIntyre does, but essentially it's just a design criteria for when you're doing a new installation for any HVAC equipment. Generally, the engineers or professionals would have to read the code, determine the certain criteria for the area, and then would have to design it to that standard. Now the building code requires us to fill out a chart for our local requirements, so it makes it easier for these design professionals to figure out the systems locally. Also, we had inclusion of the appendix for minimum code requirements for tiny houses. This is something that's new that we have adopted. I know we just went through land management code stuff where we lowered a square footage requirement for a single family home. We kept the same square footage, which is 500 square feet or more for a single family. I know sometimes the tiny homes are smaller than that, which we can amend both codes later if we decide for this, but this basically gives us a building code construction minimum requirements for a tiny house. So it gives us at least a baseline to start working off of. Before, we don't have anything. These are different standards as far as different ceiling heights, stair requirements, egress from loft areas or something, right? So just different things like that, that it gives us some of those things that are not in the existing building code that we're adopting locally, so we could have a potential for a tiny house. Okay, so some of the local amendments that we've talked about here several times, like I said, we met 4 times last year in 2018 to talk about some changes. So one of them is including 2 code sections to address the rooftop egress routes from existing upper floors residential occupancies with specific requirements for the path and the guard protection. Essentially, that's if you have to walk across a roof to exit to a means of egress off the back of the stairs. That's to delineate those requirements so that we can make sure that everyone has a safe path of travel from their resident to the ground. Then the next one was for license of on-site utility contractors to obtain permits for water, sewer, and stormwater management systems. This was one of those that we've mentioned before, that the site utility contractors reached out to Kathy in our office saying, hey, Washington County provides this, why don't you all? So we provided a license requirement for these type of contractors so they could do this work. This makes it easier for them so they don't have to get a plumber to actually pull that permit. They can actually do the work themselves by getting a license locally. Also, we clearly stated the commercial snow load requirements for the design criteria. This is a question that we received in our office a lot of times. This involved reviewing some charts and maps to try to figure out what the design load criteria would be. We just specifically stated in the code. And then also we clarified the ceiling close-in requirements so that everyone understands what it is that you need to do for each trade to get a ceiling close-in. Some other local amendments that we had, we modified the work exempt from permits. This was a discussion that we had. We defined a repair for utility work. This was created by the licensed professionals and at the request of the picker group of what could we actually do for defining what is repair work. This is similar to the city of Frederick that was mentioned before, that we wanted to be along their lines, that if they had the wires in place, then they can replace those components with something else in place. So essentially, we mirrored that, but creating our own local code. City of Frederick didn't have anything, we created something. We corrected the safety control requirements for heating appliances. This is mostly in commercial applications, and that's a picture of what's on the screen there. This is an event of emergency. It's where the button should be located when you're exiting out of the building, so it makes things a little bit clearer. It was always an interpretation. We delineated that out in the code. And then also we clarified the violations and penalty sections. Rarely do we ever find out of these codes. Generally, when we do find, it is for when people didn't pull a permit. Honestly, that's about the only time, and we give them the opportunity to pull one before we do it. We're not just finding someone because they didn't have a permit. So it's rare that we do that, but we clarified that section for violations to make things more consistent with the land management code, just how it's written, just make us more consistent across the board. Another one that we've talked about before, just making sure we have them on the record here, that we did add into the area where we amended the code sections exempting associated trade permits prior to the issuance of the building permit for residential projects, except for the swimming pools, solar panels, and electric signs. This is something we talked about before, and this is where we landed at. We also removed the exception for in residential construction codes. It does not require a carbon monoxide alarm for plumbing and mechanical installation, repairs, and additions. We had to do this because this had to be consistent with state law. The state passed a law a couple years ago with carbon monoxide alarms. We just had to remove that to be consistent with our with our state law. So the last part that will probably be the 2 largest topics that we'll talk about here tonight is some of the unresolved items that we had from this. I went back and reviewed the previous meetings to make sure we weren't missing something on our end, and these were things that we still had questions at as far as some unresolved items. The replacing of a plumbing fixture without a permit. Picker had requested that certain fixtures be exempt from these types of permits. And just to let you know how we went through this, that we wrote off the code sections at the request of what Picker had proposed. And when we worked with our licensed work group, with our local contractors, we explained to them that these were the local amendments that were being proposed to the mayor and council. they expressed concerns about certain ones, and that's what we bring to you here tonight. We never got a final answer on this one, and I think just the due diligence of staff, we have to bring you the concerns that are raised by other people in the community as well. The work group, what they had said was that they don't want any plumbing work conducted without a permit and associated city inspections. The work group was compromised with saying that they would allow any property owner the ability to obtain a permit for the replacement of an existing sinks, faucets, or shower heads and dishwashers. Currently, we only allow homeowners to apply for that permit, so it would allow any building owner to do this. And the reason behind it is they wanted to have these things inspected to make them sure that they were gone over so that people would, we would know things were done correctly, because the things that they've seen is like improper traps that were done. They've seen connections to water and sewer that weren't correct, just installed wrong, backflow valves not needed. They also had a reason of that they're called. So when these things are wrong, that like we said before, everyone's sitting here saying, we know that these people do this stuff. Everyone does it on their own. And then the professionals are called in after the fact, and then they are there to try to fix things and see that the mistakes that have made major issues inside of homes. So they had concerns of things being replaced without a permit in place or an inspection. So they're not saying that they wanted to land at where property owners could pull the permit for these things, but they wanted inspections done with it. This is a caveat for us here. This is a discussion for you all. As far as staff goes, we'll enforce what's in the code. We'll follow what's in the code. But we need direction from the council on where do we want to land at for these. You've heard from the picker community of what they would like to see. I gave you an update of what the work group would like to see. We need direction on where does the elected body want to have a code for us to enforce.
Does the dishwasher require electric as well?
Generally, but some of them are plugged now, right? Yeah.
There is electrical requirement for dishwasher.
So if the homeowner replaces the shower head and it's wrong and it's inspected, wouldn't the homeowner still have to call in a professional to get it replaced or to get it done the right way? Am I right?
Well,
So-
there would be, as anyone, if we go out and do an inspection, if something was cited as a deficiency to not meet code, then the homeowner or whomever would have the opportunity to fix it. They don't
But the
have to call
inspector's
in a
not telling the
professional.
homeowner how to repair it, right?
They'll cite what is wrong. So whatever's wrong with it. At times, they may give guidance to what they need to do to make it code compliant. It just depends on the situation. If it's very severe that they obviously didn't have a clue to what they were doing, then it might be, we advise you might want to contact a professional to do this.
I don't have an issue with the sinks, faucet, and shower heads, unless someone's gonna tell me when you replace a shower head incorrectly that there's something horrible can happen. Seems to me if they're replaced incorrectly.
Your bathroom can get wet, that's about it.
Yeah, somebody's gonna figure it out pretty quickly. Dishwashers just seem to me to be a,
Plug and play.
well, I don't know if they are or not. Do they all just have a plug or you gotta wire them? Yeah, I would think, I wouldn't be so quick to say dishwashers should be allowed to be installed that way. I don't have problems with any of the
Other
others.
jurisdictions don't require a permit for those, right?
Does the county require a permit for any of this?
The dishwasher?
Dishwasher, shower head, sink, faucet?
Like we discussed before, the county requires a permit for all of these items. But they have a policy in place that they exempt the replacement of one of these types of fixtures
like.
without a permit.
So you can replace like for like. If I have a kitchen sink, I want to put a new kitchen sink in, I can replace it without a permit.
Yes,
A
if it was
shower
just
head,
one
if I
at a
have
time,
If I have a shower head, I can replace it without a permit.
with one at a time.
So
But if I
that's-
had two showers, I couldn't replace two shower heads without a permit?
By how their policy is
Okay.
written, yes.
Well, that doesn't make sense to me.
No.
So I don't wanna do what the county does.
Silly doesn't make sense to me,
No.
and this seems silly, and I don't support silliness in any respect. It's silly.
Yeah,
Why can't I
I
replace a
concur.
ceiling fan with a like ceiling fan? I don't understand it. I don't understand it.
I don't think the average homeowner's gonna pull a permit anyway.
Well, you know they're not, and, I mean, I don't know what we're trying to achieve here. What are we trying to do?
I'm looking for direction.
I'll give you, I'll give you my direction right now. I'll give it right now. No.
I concur with all.
All right, well,
Yeah.
that's 3, 4.
Yeah, 4.
No for what? I'm sorry, I'm.
No permit needs to be pulled for a sink replacement, a shower head, a faucet.
And a dishwasher.
A plug-in dishwasher.
A dishwasher.
But here's the thing, now, if you're installing now, I'm kind of torn on this one, okay? I have a standalone dishwasher, okay? I push over to the sink, I hook it up, I plug it in, and washes my dishes, okay? I plan on replacing that with another one. I don't plan on getting one I gotta put in a cabinet, okay? But if I was gonna put one in a cabinet, honest to God, that would not do it. I'm not that
gotta
mechanically
hardwire it.
inclined. Right,
you
if I have to
got
hardwire
yeah,
it, I'm not doing it.
If you got a hardwire.
I totally agree.
But if I have one already in there and I'm just replacing the one that I have, I would probably do it myself.
Even if you had to replace the
Yep,
wire.
because the hardwire's already there.
But most homeowners are.
I don't have to hardwire anything that's already there. All I gotta do is hook up.
I would just think that most homeowners, if they have to hardwire something in, are gonna call.
I
an
agree.
and they're gonna get a professional to come in and,
I-
you know, I don't know how many dishwasher accidents or fires there've
We've
been,
never
but
had one, so.
a dishwasher?
Yeah, you do.
Yes, yes.
It just isn't electric, that's all.
The dishwasher's name is Kristen.
You got 5 of them. You got 5 of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, really. You got more dishwashers than I do.
I have no problem with whatever. I agree with Austin.
What about the toilet?
Yeah, so then if we got the sink, faucet, shower head, dishwasher, no permit for those if they're existing in place. Then we got the last one is the toilet.
If it's a like-for-like toilet, you put a wax ring in it, and you pop the toilet in, you hook the line up.
I agree.
I'd say like-for-like.
I replaced
Now,
mine, it's been working fine now for
If-
5
No, I agree.
If you're gonna put a, make a new bathroom and put a.
That's
toilet,
different.
Well, and you know what the
No,
problem
I did
is?
not.
And you know,
Shame on you.
I know.
Percy
I didn't know I
Wright
needed
in
one.
in Traffic and Parking used to say it all the time. And that's it, no matter, you put speed limits up to what people are driving, not what you want them to drive. And the people that can do this are not going to get permits. They're going to do it themselves.
That's right.
And the only people that are going to have to go get the permits then are the people that can't do it. And so it just doesn't make any sense to me.
the
Because
people
I
that
know
can't
one
do it are
thing,
gonna have somebody else
I know
do it.
too many
Right.
people who've replaced their own toilets, and I know damn well they aren't coming down and getting a permit to do that.
And if you don't know how to do it, you got a brother-in-law that does.
Yeah,
right?
so I
Everyone
just,
has a guy.
As a guy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, he just texted
Or
me,
a
as a matter of
girl.
fact, yeah.
See?
My
So we're
guy.
saying, no permit for a toilet as well then? For
Like for like.
Yep.
Well, we have to go with
New
just
construction, yeah.
existing, replacing existing.
Just replacing existing, and that's the whole, I mean, I think we get beyond that, then it starts to get, I mean, if you're putting in a bathroom
that's a whole different.
that has
story.
never been there
Yeah.
before,
Yeah.
wouldn't do it.
No question.
No,
No.
call somebody, call my guy, he'd come do it, I wouldn't do it.
That's totally different.
Just as clarification, just because it was looked as a compromise, we're saying we're waiving these permit requirements. If someone came in and decided that they wanted to have a professional do this or have someone else to do those types of things, do we want to even give the opportunity for all property owners to pull their own permit if they wanted to go through the process to have inspections?
Yeah. I don't
If
know
you
why.
have someone out there who feels that they, you know,
Wants it
listen, if they
inspected?
want to expend additional monies and all that stuff,
That's fine.
that's on
Yes.
them.
That's up to them.
Absolutely.
Because, I mean,
I mean, I can tell you flat out, if I were going to get somebody to do
It
that,
wouldn't be the government.
I would want somebody to get a permit. Like, if I hire a licensed professional and said, I want you to do this, even though you don't have to, I would say you gotta get that because your inspection would protect me as the homeowner.
That's right.
That licensed professional did that. Right?
You'd be surprised if it doesn't.
And you'd have some recourse if it was
Some
wrong.
would.
Some would.
Right.
Where you wouldn't if you did it yourself, the recourse is on you.
Yeah,
revenue.
if you wanna get a, and I think, yeah, you're right. If you're gonna hire a contractor and you wanna make sure they did the job.
If somebody wants to do that, they should be able to,
I think
without
so,
any,
yeah.
without a doubt. But I don't think we make it mandatory.
Right.
No, it's just given the opportunity.
Sure.
Just the same as the homeowner has that, it would be the opportunity for a property owner to pull it if they wanted to. And then the last unresolved item that we had, because it was one of those with their electrical receptacles, they're replacing one of those is like essentially the example's always been given that if it was a ivory color that they wanted to go to white, that the replacement of that receptacle, the outlet, that they should just be able, that from the picker group, the committee felt that they, as a homeowner, property owner, have the right just to replace that without any permit. The catch on that is that when you replace any type of device like that, it does require arc fault protection in residential occupancies. So this has been around in the code since 2014. Arc faults have been around since 1999, but this has just been in the code that if you're replacing that type of device, that you should have arc fault protection because this is providing.
Is that the three-prong probe versus the two, or is that different?
No, this
That's
is
a push button arc fault.
Well, there's all sorts of different ones.
Mine are.
But the arc fault is to help protect the wiring to prevent any heat or anything of that nature. So, I mean, just think that if you've ever pulled out a vacuum while running from the cord, that creates that arc in the electrical system and either can come out through the wall or it can go into the wall and then, of course, heat the wire. And then if that continues over time, it can essentially heat the wire and cause a fire. So this is where it's to provide that this was saying that when properties are having these types of upgrades just done to the outlets themselves, that you're providing the same level of protection for new construction that it is required in to start putting that same level of protection on that wiring system in existing. So, you know, we had a lot of discussion about this with our licensed work group that this is probably something that the city should look into. But again, it was one of those that our picker committee wanted it's in the wall, it's there, it's a like for like, but there is other components down the line. We would delete this amendment if we decide to, or delete, it's not an amendment, we would delete that code section if we decide to go down that path. So we just need direction on, do we want this or not?
I think there's you gotta keep in mind that our stock of houses in the city is approaching 100 years old.
Yeah, I think you need this.
Well, I don't know.
No.
I don't think so.
You know,
If you're gonna replace, you've got a wall outlet.
I'm all interested because I need to be doing this, so talk to
Yeah,
me.
and you wanna put a new wall, you just
I
wanna
want to put a new
replace
wall
that.
outlet in there, right?
Now you're gonna plug you're gonna plug a 110 volt window unit in it. That arc fault is probably gonna pop. You're not gonna be able to run your air conditioner.
Are you saying that based on the motor load that's on the circuit?
Yeah.
Okay, well, they're designed, the arc faults are designed to handle a motor load, whether it be a fan or refrigerator or air conditioner. My thought, going back to what Councilman Minster was saying, with the older homes and what the arc fault will do in protecting that circuit from the arcing and the overheating with older homes and knob and tube wiring and that sort of thing, probably it'd be beneficial to have the arc fault devices in place whenever we have a receptacle replacement in those residential units as required by the code to handle any of those loads that are put on those older wiring systems.
So what my concern is, and I have one of these older homes, you know, when additions are put on or we needed to put on an air conditioner, I know I got a couple outlets in my house that are 3 prongs, okay? But all my other ones are 2 prongs dating back to the 40s. In the last 5 years, there have been 2 fires in my neighborhood, one of them fatal, both caused by electrical. And I'm assuming, without knowing a whole lot, that if I were talking to the fire chief, he would tell us that electrical fires in older residents are one of the main fire hazards we have. I've had the problems, I got outlets in my house with tape over them, because I don't want to use them. I'm getting ready to have the electrician come in and start doing this. So that's my only concern, and I don't know, enough about any of this, and when it comes to electricity, I immediately go, gee, somebody needs to be careful about dealing with that. I see a shower head that's going to get the bathroom wet. I see an electrical outlet that could burn your house down.
Two different animals there.
Right.
Definitely, yeah.
So that's my only concern.
It's very expensive to put arc faults on each receptacle.
Well, it doesn't necessarily have to be each receptacle, it
It
just
it
be
just
on
has
the circuit.
On the circuit,
Circuit.
so as long as, now, I mean, is that a thing if, okay, you're replacing one, is the code gonna say you're replacing a receptacle, you've got to have an arc fault on that circuit someplace. So if I've already got a circuit in this end of the room, or I've got an arc fault in this end of the room, it's on the same circuit, I'm good, I can just do like for like receptacle replacement?
I think the other difficulty for me maybe stems from a little bit of the difference between the two issues, and as it applies to your earlier point of, this you can do one at a time thing. I mean, I look at this particular item and I say, okay, you install a shower head room, you put a toilet down wrong, your kid goes to use it, doesn't work right, kid's fine. You got kids that are in these apartments that are just shoving things into outlets and, all kinds of devices and tablets and all this stuff, and you don't have the appropriate electrical system placed in these properties that are all 100 years old, that all have been broken into 6 and 8 and 9 units that were, single units at one time, and have no idea sort of how those systems are set up. Kids have no idea, of the implications, in plugging that stuff in, and that occurrence happens. That to me isn't a matter of cleaning up a bathroom floor. It's not a matter of calling the landlord and saying, hey, the toilet happened wrong, whatever. It just isn't the same scenario. I just think it's a much more serious item, because by and large, in these specific instances, we're talking about, one toilet or one shower head or two in a place. You're talking about a whole place that has a bunch of different units that are all interconnected with that electricity. Having that fault occur without awareness and impacting immediately those other units in that building in a fairly drastic manner. I think that this is something that I would want a professional to be doing.
Well, and I
Because
think
it isn't just a faucet.
I think that's the difference of a single-family home and a multi-residential unit too. I mean, I've replaced outlets in my house all over,
But I don't think this is differentiating.
This is arc fault protection.
Yeah, I was just asking.
This is like
And you can answer this.
I mean, it's not differentiating
Probably.
it's not differentiating between, it's not differentiating here between single family.
No,
and
it's not.
Residential
No, if you
occupancies.
were, if you're
Right,
saying
and
arc
that's why-
fault in every
My question is.
every residential unit, period.
My question is, if I want to replace all the outlets in this room, is this saying that all of those outlets have to be the expensive arc fault outlet? Or if they're all on the same circuit, can I have one that pops, one arc fault protection and then I can put in regular outlets in the rest of the room?
Yes. Because it
It's
can be
on the
even
same
on
circuit.
it can be on a breaker as well that can be back at the panel box. That's how they first came out. Like when ground faults started back in the 70s, they were on breakers, and then they eventually got to the devices in the wall. Now, they originally started back out of breakers for arc faults, and now they're getting to devices in the wall. Yes, the devices in the wall are
You
expensive.
put the breakers, that right on the breaker box is what you're saying?
Or on the outlet at the beginning one.
I mean, if you have an arc
Right,
fault,
but so if you had it on each circuit so if you have 7 breakers, you would need 7 of these, and that would cover all the outlets, for instance.
Or if you had 3 outlets in a room,
You put them on
the
3
beginning
outlets.
outlet
The
would be
beginning
the
outlet
one.
would be the one.
I-
So you don't have to,
Shut the rest down.
replace.
That's right, it would shut the rest down.
Yeah, because the way I read this was any outlet
Right.
has to be the
That's just an
arc fault.
exorbitant cost
Yeah.
for
and-
a
and
100-year-old
if it's
home.
gonna, I mean, and again, you're gonna have to have an electrician or somebody determine where the circuit is.
Right.
But
My school just gets tired of that. You can't run it. Shuts down my
that,
I mean,
and then I don't know how you word that though in the code. I mean,
But I just think if you have a 100-year home, that's the home that needs the upgrade. I don't understand why you would say that you can't build new construction unless you put this stuff in because of safety issues. But if you want to replace all the electric in a 100-year-old home, you don't have to worry about that. That just doesn't,
does a new construction home require an arc fault on each receptacle?
on each circuit.
On each circuit,
The
okay.
receptacles be arc fault protected. Now,
Yeah.
that could be either by a device ahead of all the receptacles in the beginning of the circuit, or at the circuit breaker.
yeah, I don't have any problem with that, about saying that every receptacle has to be arc.
No, we're not
Right,
saying
that's
it.
the-
Says,
that's
as
my
long as the
thing.
wording
Not
goes
every
in correctly,
receptacle.
that every circuit has to be arc protected.
As
that
long
should-
as, yeah, I didn't want it to be interpreted that, I'm gonna put a new wall outlet in over here, or I'm gonna replace a wall outlet receptacle, and I'm already arc fault protected.
Right, you
I don't
shouldn't
have
have
to
to
put
worry.
another one in.
Right.
Right. And as homes age and they do that upgrade, that if you are already an arc fault protected home, if you wanted to replace those outlets, it would not require a permit.
Okay,
Okay,
good to go.
yeah. I'm good with that.
Okay. So it'll still require the arc fault protection on this. Okay. All right, and then that is all I have.
That is it?
These
Oh,
there
my
stuff.
goodness.
So,
Okay,
and
you
how-
got 10 minutes to go, man.
Oh, we still got another thing.
10 minutes.
all right, thank you all.
Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Blaine.
Thank you, gentlemen.
All right. Hagerstown Cultural Trail proposed splash pad location. I love the West Washington Street location.
It's hard to envision, because the whole thing's hard to envision with the building there, but I have no problems with it.
Go ahead. I have a ton of problems with it.
So staff's working on the design of the Urban Improvement Project Plaza and the completion of the cultural trail from Antietam Street to Washington Street. We are working on a couple of the last details for some things, but some things we really need direction from you on is the splash pad. And then on kind of a related issue is what are we going to do with the property that we're going to purchase at 319 Summit Avenue? So on the splash pad, on what our schedule is, our goal is to attempt to get this out to bid late this year, have the construction start next year, early next year, once the building contractors like Callis and Morgan Keller are out of the road, so that we can complete the plaza and the cultural trail. So on the splash pad, I know you want a splash pad, it's in your list of goals and priorities. They're really popular, they're building them all over the place. So we've done a lot of research on this, and what we're recommending is there's 2 different types of splash pad. One is almost like a swimming pool where the water is constantly recirculated, treated, chlorinated. The bacteria is taken out of it and it's shot back up in the air. The other one is basically you shoot potable water in the air, it runs through the sewer and is gone. And although that sounds wasteful, it's probably by far the cheapest arrangement, and it's not regulated by the state of Maryland, so you don't need bathrooms, you don't need attendants. And if you do it right and you put facilities in that don't overuse water, it's a very manageable cost, and I think it's a better way to go when you have a facility like this that's basically unsupervised. So I have provided for you some examples of some other communities that have these kind of splash pads in kind of unsupervised areas. The one in Silver Spring at the top, Columbia Heights at the bottom. This is some pictures I took at One Loudon Town Center. This is the one in Old Town Winchester. So they're basically just ground jets that shoot up that are choreographed, so the kids enjoy kind of the surprise of the water shooting out of the ground. And a lot of them have very nice lighting on them, and that's changes as well. That's kind of how these are typically done, unsupervised in urban areas. So that's one issue is that type of design, particularly one that has maybe a decorative design to it like this, is that what you're looking for? And the other question is, where would we want to put it? If we want to put it on the cultural trail, it seemed to me like there's 3 possible locations. The first being just south of Washington Street where 4347 is scheduled to be removed, and we're negotiating with the owners to acquire that piece of property, and that's where the cultural trail will come through. The second one would be down at the Harold Mail Plaza, which is just north of Baltimore Street there at Hood Street. But we all know that there's many other things being discussed about that area. And then the third thing would be down at 319 Summit, down at Park Circle. Excuse me. So I gave you a list of pros and cons of each of those, but I guess the feedback I'm looking for is that design kind of what you were looking for, I had in mind, and then where would you envision us putting this? And once I know that, then we can take it from there. We just did have this was some free work I had done by Aquatics. If you put one along the cultural trail, I know the buildings in the back don't mean anything, it's a cartoon, but basically that's what it would look like. It'd be kind of a long, skinny trail with some sort of patterning, decorative patterning on the surface.
Now, let me ask a question.
Yes, sir.
Down on Summit, in the, and I've, I read the possible problems with MDE and all that, but let's just say we didn't put it where the gas station is. What about in front in that?
In the triangle?
In the triangle, yeah, where that where the, I don't know what that art thing is right now, but I mean, what if we put it there and then we did something with the gas station that actually made sense, like an ice cream shop or something like that?
But is that really walkability to that for kids? And, I mean, aren't we trying at the same time to encourage folks to come downtown? And, I mean, it seems to me like that's just a little bit inconvenient for families to take and walk their kids to.
Oh, I'm just
where they're
asking a
gonna
question.
park
I mean, like I said, I'm good with West Washington Street.
Or that particular location
I
at
think it would
least.
minimize the MDE issue, because it's not on the parcel that is hot right now, but, yeah, then you have to weigh all these other factors.
So, all of these pictures that you provide, and I've taken the kids to a number of these things, obviously, have a couple of things. One is they're open. They have good accessibility to sunlight. And they are fairly insulated from traffic.
Yes, I would agree.
I mean, they're all like that. But the one location that we're talking about on Washington is literally right next to the street, pigeonholed between 2 tall buildings, basically going to be like a hallway in the shadows most times of the day, right next to a street where we are going to want professionals that are doing their business during the day traversing that area. I mean, it doesn't even make sense to me. I guess as someone who would bring down a number of kids to that type of activity space, I'm gonna want it to be well lit. I'm going to want it to be parking accessible. I'm going to want there to be sun. I'm gonna want there to be insulation from traffic. I mean, imagine on that triangle trying to corral, I'm just trying to imagine corralling my 5 kids into like that space, or saying, don't run into the people walking by like Lou who are going about to do their business through that area who are coming from the club.
Splashed.
It makes no sense.
Yeah, I agree with
Zero
you.
sense.
Yeah.
I look at Site 2, and I've said this from day one when we started this trail, and you've heard me say it over and over. that's the location I think it should be, because it is the best insulated. It does have access to the most sunlight. It does have parking availability. It does want people to traverse that area in a pedestrian manner. There is no better space than that. Do I think it's a neat idea over near Park Circle? Sure, but I drive through Park Circle every day, so there's no way I would ever want that to be the space for it. And I'll say it again, I think we should pick the orange sculpture up and put it in that very visible location of that triangle where we tear down the station. And we put the splash pad over there in that insulated area
Where the orange
where
thing is.
where the orange thing is. To me, that just makes too much sense for what you're trying to do with the space. And if we're not trying to do that with the space, then we should do something somewhere else.
Well, what if you take location 2 there, what happens if you move that to the left over into, this is where the mural of unusual size is, right? In here?
Because that's
All
not
that
out.
We're proposing to put the other arts on.
all that open area in there.
With the new one.
Because that's insulated pretty much from traffic in there.
We don't own that, though.
That's
It's
not
owned by
ours.
the Hagerstown Housing Authority. we'd
So you'd have to get
work
an MOU with Hagerstown.
Yeah, I mean, that just looks like a
That's
nice
open
area for
and-
kids to run and play and not be able to dart out in front of an automobile or something.
Right.
With the art there on the wall.
Right. We would just have to meet with their board and discuss that with them, make sure that they're
Yeah, I'm
willing
just
to do
looking
an
at
MOU, as the mayor suggested.
open area here.
Yeah, it's kind of
especially
limited, and
for
that's kind
sunlight.
of the struggle that we've been having.
Yeah.
The only thing I'll say about the Washington Street one that Councilman Alshire mentioned was the kind of the confining of the kids. We have to keep a wall along Washington Street on the streetscape where the building face is now. That building face is going to remain. So I don't
Right.
think the kids will be able to just run out onto Washington Street unless they run down the trail.
I
What
hear
if
you
you
saying
moved it
that.
back closer
Yeah,
to the
and I had
plaza?
kids too, I know what you're talking about.
What if you moved it back closer to the plaza instead of out toward the
We
street?
could do that.
The other way.
We could,
Where if we had events in the evening and things like that on that plaza, it would be available.
This is the drawing, it shows Washington Street here and Antietam Street here. What we were thinking about was here, here's the plaza, here's the Maryland Theater.
It doesn't.
So we
bring
showed
the
it up
kids
here
to
at
that.
Washington
It's too
Street,
dangerous.
here's the plaza, here's the district court, here's the Maryland Theater. I think what you're suggesting, Mayor, is we should.
I will never venture to that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't
that's
think
too
any, I
dangerous.
don't think any of us like that idea.
No.
That's not the place for it.
I
we
like,
thought
I,
Washington Street would be visible and.
Yeah, I know, I agree, but and I think the person who knows better than anybody in the world is the one who has 5 kids. And you're right on Washington Street in a confined spot is not what you want. And, so where are you suggesting, Kristen?
I just think it needs to be somewhere over in the middle of this. And like I said, where you have Site 2 listed, I mean, that was like the original
Yep.
idea.
We actually designed one and had it out the bid.
Right.
Yeah,
But we
that
decided
makes
against it because of the needing the public restrooms.
Yes.
And I'm not opposed to the housing authority location, except for the fact that, then you're governed by their limitations and those liabilities. Other than that, either one of those areas have been fun. I don't know. I just think it needs to feel open. I think of the one at the Inner Harbor, which is sort of down along the harbor, and it's fairly insulated, and it's got, some open park.
I say before we make a decision, you have a conversation with the housing authority to feel them out on
And
that.
then for design of it, is there some way we can do something that is, I'm thinking of the, the mural on the side of the University of Maryland that was painted. Something that's kind of Maryland and Hagerstown centric, a design that's, that's, there was one at Columbia, Columbia Heights. That's
Yeah.
just circles, but I mean, if we had something like that that was,
What you look down and see would be some sort of a
you
design.
can see some
unique
kind of
to
a neat,
Hagerstown.
really neat design.
Yeah, I
with
imagine
the-
design.
Yeah,
Like the Basil, or Hazel from Basil. Painted.
Something that's themed of our.
right.
Yeah, little high school.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
Okay, so I should meet with the housing authority and see if they're willing. If not, then we'll look at site two.
And think sunshine and parking, yeah.
And no speeding traffic.
And all of Kristen's kids.
I still think that orange sculpture is no better place for it than over there.
Well, we're probably gonna have to move that
At site
anyway.
number 3. I just think it's gonna get the most visibility, and I think it'll be a really cool sort of terminus location to make that connection with the
You
park.
know, what a lot of people like about that sculpture is when you look through it, you've got framed pictures and stuff, you'd be looking right over City Park. Could be cool. So speaking of that end, then, as you know, we have an agreement with the owner of 319 Summit to purchase that property. In that agreement, there was basically 2 caveats. One was the environmental study, which we said we needed to do, and then funding. So on the environmental study, we had Triad go out and do their phase 2 assessment, and they found petroleum hydrocarbons on the property. That's not a
Surprise,
shock to
surprise.
anybody, yeah. But it's a good thing that we did the work that we did. So when you have that detected, then you have to submit that to MDE, and then they give you a site status letter. So that letter is in here. It sounds kind of onerous, but really, we can abide by almost anything in here, depending on the use of the property. So keep that in mind as we move into that discussion. On the funding end, everything's been approved by the county for the $105,000 from program open space. It's been submitted to the state, it's working through the clearinghouse. I think the only thing I'm going to need from you there is we'll have to pass a resolution to push the closing date back till about November, because till they work through their process, it's going to take that much time. So I put together a little chart there. If you think about that property, and I don't have a good picture of it here, but basically I came up with 4 different ideas of what we could do with the property. One is simply remove the building and kind of extend that triangle, grass and landscaping. Another option would be to put some sort of a parking lot there that would serve the cultural trail, maybe, who knows, food truck vending, who knows what we could do with that, and we can work that out if that's the direction you want to go. Third thing would be the splash pad, which I think we've already nixed. And the fourth thing would be to keep the building or renovate a building, renovate it or build a new building there for some sort of a vending thing, like ice cream or something like that.
Does, the contamination doesn't preclude it from being like an ice cream shop or something?
It does not. There is, we'd have to put in, as I put in this table, that you have to put a vapor system. If there's hydrocarbons coming up through the floor, you literally have to vent out like you would radon in a house.
thing, yeah.
It's not really a big deal, but that would have to be included.
And
I like the green space idea.
Do what?
Green space.
School
How about
does
a
that
dog
building
Yeah,
right there.
I agree.
I like a dog park.
And then
You got City
it's
Park
just
right across
covered
the
in
street.
dirt.
Hmm?
And it's just one big patch.
Take it around it.
Not the same.
No, I think we're gonna take the building down. I think,
Yeah,
no, I think we put in green space, which gives us a million options.
Yeah, down the
Including
road
more
we
art,
could do.
more art space there. But I think keeping the building up is just another expense for the city to bear and maybe become a landlord. And also, I was saying this will be credits towards storm management if we take this down and get rid of this impervious surface.
yeah, I think so.
Every little bit helps.
So you don't think that like having an ice cream shop or something like that would be very helpful for that end of town? There's nothing there.
I think
Well-
that building is a wall
Yeah.
between the end of the trail and the beginning of the park.
Like Lou was saying, I think, you know, if we make it grass, with some benches and that kind of stuff, that option is always there.
Ice cream cart, there's various things that can
Or
go there.
pull a food truck in there.
Yeah, but
Not if it's grass.
I think, no, you can do a million things. I think keeping the building is just a liability for us.
So take up the pavement, tear down the building.
Yeah.
As long as it's a dog park.
By default, it becomes a dog park.
It does.
Yeah, it's gonna be a
It will
dog
be a
park.
dog park anyway.
Careful what you wish for.
Not fences and.
I'm just saying.
No, I see another location for it, that's great.
That's what I needed.
Good job, Ron.
Thank you.
Thank you.
City Administrator.
Firing up the bulldozers.
Just a couple of things, Mayor. Friday night, outdoor movie at City Park, weather permitting. How to Train a Dragon, excellent movie. 7 o'clock, that starts.
Cobra Parks movie, thank you.
Yeah, it's a great movie. I'm now a grandfatherly expert on these type of movies. Saturday, 7th Annual City Championship Golf Tournament at the Greens at Hamilton Run. All levels can play, and you get 18 holes with a cart lunch and a player gift bag for participating. And then Saturday night at the park, summer concert series, again, weather should cooperate this week. Chris Woodward Band, that's country. It's also taco night, featuring pulled pork, burgers, steamers, and tacos. So, and then, of course, Sunday night's always municipal band. And I see Brianne Tesla, I don't know what your married name, I always knew you as Tesla. I see you out there. I don't want to have your time that you've sat here all night wasted. I want to say congratulations to her dad, Mike, who was one of the latest inductees of the Washington County Sports Hall of Fame. I know dear to the heart of Councilman Alshire, former soccer player at South Hagerstown High School. Mikey's a great friend, great mentor to my son-in-law as athletic director at South High, and long overdue that Mikey T, as I call him, was put in the Hall of Fame. So congratulations to him. Thank you.
That's it for you.
That's it for me.
Nothing tonight.
Lou?
Having officiated high school athletics for 30-some years, I agree with everything you just said.
And you're long overdue too, by the
Yeah,
way,
right.
Councilman.
Congratulations. That's all.
Nothing today.
Kristen? No. Me either. We're adjourned.
Not bad.
No.
You're welcome. You're gonna love it.
It's getting warm,
I
man.
get requests for replacement.